Okay, Shan, we can go ahead and get started. So, welcome to today's workshop. Today we'll be going over an intro to Git and GitHub. And yeah, so I'm Lavender.
I'm Melissa.
And we'll be presenting today's workshop. So, wait, let me go over here actually. Okay, so please sign in with this QR code. I'll give you guys like 10 seconds really quickly if you just want to scan that. Sorry, I'll stop. Okay, awesome. Okay. And here's the link to the slides. I think Lorelai said they're also posted in the Discord. So you can also access it through that if you guys want to follow along. Okay, so yeah, this week we're going to be going over Git and GitHub. So this is what the agenda is going to look like. So these are the different topics that we're going to cover. Just a preface, like Git especially is like there's a lot to it. But today we'll be going more of like a high level overview. So we won't be going like super in depth with all the technical details, but we just kind of want to give you guys like a overview of what it is because it's definitely something you'll be working with a lot. So yeah. So let's start off with what is Git. So Git is a version control system. It's one of the most popular, I think it is the most popularly used version control system, and it's also industry standard. And I'll go over what version control is in a second. But basically, like TDLR, Git lets you track changes in your code. And then it also allows for multiple people to collaborate on the same project safely. And what do I mean by that is, let's first talk about what exactly is version control. So kind of like the name suggests, it's a way to let you track changes in your files over time. So when you work on a project, there's several different like components to it, all these different files. And you're going to like have different iterations of it. And using Git basically lets you keep track of all these different iterations that you have. And it allows you to go back to previous versions. And then, like I said, it also lets you collaborate with other people. So I think one example that I'm sure many of you guys have used with is like Google Docs. I'm sure you guys know you can edit your history in Google Docs, but if you see here on the right side, there's like these different timestamps, different versions, and then you can also see like the contributor name. This is what I like to compare like Git to. It's like a version history of your code in the project that you're working on. Okay, and just another visual example. So here we have three different snapshots. So let's say I'm like creating a new project, right? I make a file and I make it in February and I just like write some changes, whatever. And then like a month later, I come back to the project. Let's say I add another file, I add some new code and I edit some of the code in the original version. So Git's gonna like keep a snapshot of that first project or first version of the project and then also a second version of the project. And let's say like another month later, I go in and add some more changes. It'll just keep like snapshots of each version. Does that make sense to everyone? Like the different versions? Okay, awesome. Oh yeah. How we're gonna structure this is there's a lot of different commands that you use with Git, but I think what I'm gonna do is because we split the workshop into different like topics, what we're gonna do is just kind of have some general commands that go with that topic at the end of each section, just so you guys don't get like all these commands at the end. So here are just some very basic Git commands that you're probably going to use. First is git init, and basically this lets you start tracking a project with Git. And also, if you guys don't know how to use Git commands, you guys know what a terminal is, I'm sure. So basically, when you're working on a project, you open the terminal and you can run these different Git commands, and that's like when you use them. But yeah, so git init lets you start tracking a project with Git. Git status, it'll let you see like what has changed. Kind of how I said there's different versions of it, so you'll be able to get like a view of that. And then git help. So like I said, there's so many different commands in Git. I don't even know all of them. So if you ever are confused about what a command is, you could just say git help and then the command, and then it'll give you like the definition and the use case of it. Okay, awesome. Also, if anyone ever has any questions at any point, feel free to like stop me. Okay, next we're gonna go on to the three main states of Git. So what exactly does this refer to? So Git, like working with Git can be kind of split up into three separate phases. So first we have our working directory, then we have our staging area, then we have our repository. So there's a visual over there, but I'll also kind of briefly explain what each one is, and then we'll go a little bit more in depth in the following slides. So working directory, you can think of this as like where you edit your file. So like adding it, deleting files, making changes to it. things like that. The staging area, basically, this is when you're like selecting what changes you want to add to your next commit. And I realize now that some of these terms I am introducing later. So this can just be like a high level overview, and then we'll like elaborate more in following slides. And then the repository is where you're storing the actual history of it. So the repository is where everything's going to be held. There's a brief like diagram, but actually I'll go to the next slide so we can like talk a bit more in depth. So working directory, it's where you're actively like editing your code. So this is probably what you think of like when you're coding on like what, like your IDE. Like this is where you're adding files, you're making changes to your code, you can delete files. When you're working like on your local computer, like in a code project, none of this is like part of the version history yet, right? It's like it's kind of like a work in progress. It's everything that could be added but hasn't been added yet. Yeah, you can add, edit, delete files. And then in the working directory, it'll contain both the tracked and untracked files. So I like to think about it like tracked are the files that Git already knows about, and untracked files are maybe files that Git hasn't seen before. So let's say I'm working on a project, right? And kind of going back to that diagram earlier where there was different snapshots of the project. Remember how in the first snapshot, I only have like one file? If I add that new file, it's going to be untracked at first because Git like has no recollection of it. It's a completely new file. So at that stage, it would be untracked. But then let's say I like I add it to my version history, and then in following like commits, it would be tracked because now Git like learns about it. Yeah. And then the reason why we differentiate between tracked files and untracked files, I'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about commit specifically, but it's like you have a lot of different files in a project, but you might not necessarily want to like share all of them, especially if you're working with like a remote repository like GitHub, or maybe you're working with other people. If some of your files contain like sensitive information, like API keys, personal information, just things that aren't really necessary to share with everyone, these might be files that you are never going to track. So you're never going to actually like add them to the shared version history. Um, Okay, so here's some commands that you might work with within the working directory. So we have git status. So this is where you can see like what has changed within your project, and then git diff. So basically it shows the differences between your like current code and then your last commit. So like basically it shows the difference between two iterations of your project. Does anybody need me to clarify anything on this before I move on? No? Okay. Okay, next is the staging area. So this is where you can like select certain changes that you want to add to your commit. So basically, let's say I have three files and I edited one, two, three, but maybe like the first two files I edited, like I'm done with them, I'm ready to move on, I can add them to the version history, but maybe that last file I'm still working on and I don't quite want to like add it to my official history yet. What you can do is you can stage different parts of like the code that you've been working on. And staging is just a way of saying like selecting what you want to like move forward in the process, if that makes sense. Yeah, so another thing, like I said, it lets you group related changes together, and this helps you like organize your like history for later on. So going back to that example of having maybe three separate like changes, maybe two of them are like related to each other, but one of them's like completely separate. If I want like a cleaner history, I might choose to group those two as like a stage change, and then I'll push them together so that they're like always staying together. So then it's just like more organized overall when you're looking back at your history. Okay, here are some commands that you would use in the staging area. So you can use git add. This is when you stage a file, and this is like basically you're saying like, okay, I want this file to go into my next set of like official changes. And that's the syntax for it. A very popular thing that a lot of people do is they'll just do git add dot, and dot just stands for all changes. So this will just like stage all your files, basically all your tracked files. And then if you want to unstage changes, so let's say you were working on something and you staged it, but you decide, wait, I don't want to stage it. I want to like work on it some bit more. You can unstage it, and you can use this command. Okay, next, we're going to talk about repositories. This is the last like phase in the three main states. So think of a repository as a folder, and it just stores all your files basically. So if you're working on any project, it's probably going to be in a repository. Also, a lot of people like to refer to it as repos, which is why I put that up there. But yeah, think of it as like a huge folder. It tracks all your files, it tracks all the changes. It has a lot of like metadata as well. It just stores everything related to your project. And the like repository itself is stored as a database. And when you create like a Git or when you initialize like a Git command, I think, it creates like this Git folder. And then within that, that's where your actual like version history is being stored. So it's going to be within like this folder within your project. And then some things that the repository would contain are things like your past commits. So that's kind of like what I was saying, the version history. It's comprised of these different commits, different file versions, snapshots, and then branch and tag records. We haven't talked about that yet, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah. And then here are some common commands that you might use with repositories. So you have git commit. This is when you're like, basically, once you've added all your like changes into that staging area, which is like, remember, like when you want to select like, okay, I want this to move forward in the process. What commit does, it's basically saying like, okay, now I want to actually add this to like the official version history. That's how I think about git commit. Git log is a way for you to view all of your commits. So essentially it's just how you view all your history basically. And then git show commit is if you want to inspect a specific like snapshot. So going back to that example of all these different iterations, let's say I want to specifically look at iteration number 2, I can use git show and it'll tell me like the information about that specific iteration. Okay. Yeah, this is also like a visual diagram of a repository. Basically, you'll just have all these different changes and they just go within like the repository. Yeah, repository is basically just like a huge folder that contains all the information about your project. Okay, and oh, oops, already had this. Sorry. Oh, yeah. And then kind of going off about what I was saying, like these are some of the commands that we mentioned, and then this is how they would fit into like the workflow. Basically, you would use git init to like start a new project, right? Start a new Git instance, and then you would add it to your working directory. This is where we like make all our changes in our code. We can use git add to like select certain ones that we want to add to the staging area. Then from the staging area, we'll actually commit it to the repository. And that's how it gets like permanently into the version history of the project. Okay. And then one more thing on repositories, we could split that into like 2 main types. We have a local repository and a remote repository. So local repository, like the name suggests, this is the project that runs on your local machine. So think of it as like, I'm sure when you guys are working on like coding projects, you could just open a folder and then like start coding within that folder. And that's just going to be on your like computer. Like I won't be able to access that like project unless I'm on your computer, right? So that's what a local repository is. It's just a version of a project that lives just on your computer, and it keeps track of all your own like local changes. And then a remote repository, this is a repository that is stored on like a server or a cloud. So websites like GitHub, I'm sure you guys may have heard of. If not, it's something that you'll probably use. GitLab, these are places where they're like repositories, but they're not stored on your actual computer. It's going to be stored, like it says, like on a server or a cloud. And we'll talk a bit more about GitHub a little in a later slide, but just a quick overview of it. It's basically used to like share code so you can collaborate with other people on the same project. Yeah, so those are the 2 differentiation of the main like different types of repositories, local versus remote, which will come into play later when we're talking about like the workflow and working with local or remote repositories. Okay, does anybody have any questions before I move on from, oh, just kidding, sorry. I'll go over this really quickly. Okay, so like I was saying, the typical workflow, how the local repository and the remote repository, like why do we need 2 separate ones? Basically, the typical workflow is you'll like code within your local repository. This is where all like your changes are, all the code that you add is. But then on the remote repository, once you're done working in your local repository, you'll share those changes that you made to the remote repository. And that's like how you'll collaborate with other people and kind of sync it, basically, you're like syncing your own version with this remote version. Okay. Okay. Actually, before I move on from that side, does anybody have any questions on this? I realize now that I put the workflow before I introduced all of like the key vocabulary words. So I know like I mentioned things like branches and commits and like repositories, which were actually in later slides. So yeah, okay, worst case, we can always come back to this after I go over those like key vocabulary terms. But if no questions from anyone else, we'll just proceed for now. Okay, So this is basically what it would look like, including the local and remote repository. So this is kind of the workflow. Basically, you would get like the remote repository, you would like get a copy of that, right? You would work on it in your own working directory. Then you would make your changes, put it to the staging area. From that staging area, you'll commit those actual changes into your local repository. From your local repository, you can move that into the remote repository. Okay. Okay, yeah. Now we're talking about like commits and what they actually are. So hopefully this clears up some of your questions if any of you are a little bit lost. So what are commits? Commits are basically like a snapshot of what your project is at a certain point in time. So if you guys remember that initial diagram of like those three different iterations, each of those would be considered a commit, right? Each of those is like a different point in time, and each of those was like a snapshot of the project at those points in time. What a commit has, it records the files that changed and why they changed, and each commit has a unique ID. And this is how you like will differentiate your different commits and how you like refer to them. And then it'll probably also have a message describing the change because if you're working on a project and you make all these different changes to it, but you don't really know like what each change is for, right? You don't want to read through the code every single time you want to look at a commit. So you'll just have a quick like summary describing what it is. And to visualize that, oh, just kidding. Okay, why we need commits is that's how like your version history is made up of. Git stores the history of all the commits that you've made. And then kind of like what I was saying earlier, it helps you go back in time to view past commits. And then also if you want to change anything or like revert. Yeah, so it lets you undo mistakes, understand what changed and why, review other team members' work. And then also this last one, detect cause of bugs. And what I mean by that is let's say you're like working on a project with many people and like you work on it and you realize, oh, like something's broken, like there's a bug in it, and you might want to like identify what the root cause is. A very common workflow is you could go back in, look at that version history, and you can go through the different commits and kind of figure out where was like the start of this, right? Because if someone pushed, like if someone's commit contained the buggy code, then you can realize like, oh, okay, it was this commit that caused that. Okay, yeah. So here's a visualization of what a commit might look like. Think of it kind of like a timeline, right? Because it's history. So it's like a timeline. Like I mentioned, there's that unique ID. And unique ID, we're not going to go too much into the technicalities of it, but essentially it's just this super long string because we want it to be unique, right? So longer it is, the more like, well, there's probably not going to be a duplicate. And that's how you can identify separate commits. And then we also have this little commit message, and it's just like a summary message of all the code changes within that snapshot. So here are some like different examples. Like if we're adding styles for navigation, we would just like write that really quickly. So then in the future, when you're looking back on your version history, you know what each like commit was meant for and like what its purpose was. Okay, here are some commands that you might use with commit. So git add, I think I actually talked about these two earlier, so we'll skip over them. But basically, those are how you're staging the changes. So git commit and message, this is how you're actually like pushing it to the repository. So remember how I said there's a staging area and then a repository? The staging area, this is like what you want to put to version history, and then actually committing it to the repository is how you're actually saying like, okay, here, like this will be like stored in the permanent timeline. And you do this with git commit, and then this -m message, this is how you create that little like description. Yeah, it's very standard to include that. And then git log, if you want to view your commit history. So remember this would be like an example of an output of git log, getting to see all your different like commits. You would use git log, and it just shows you like basically the timeline. Right? Okay, before we move on from commits, does anybody have any questions? No one? Okay. Okay, awesome. Okay, next part, we're gonna talk about branches. So what are branches? Well, technically branches are the pointer to a specific commit in a repository, but in case some of you guys don't know what a pointer is, basically it just represents a separate line of development. And it contains a parallel version of your project. Basically, it's just like a separate clone of the project, but this one it's like you can work on it and it won't change anything in the original project. So like why do branches exist? it lets you work on different ideas, features, fixes. It basically just lets you like play around with the code and you could do whatever you want within that branch and it'll stay isolated within that branch. So it's not going to affect the main branch, which is really important, especially if you're working on a shared project. Because like let's say I want to like add a feature, but then I mess it up and I introduce all these bugs. I wouldn't want like the main official project to be affected by that, right? So what I would do is create a separate branch so I can like play around, try to get this feature working before I actually make it officially part of that main branch. Yeah, and then what I mean by main branch is the default branch in a lot of projects. It's called main. I don't think it's called master anymore, but I know occasionally it's still called master. But yeah, it's like the main branch. And then here's like a visualization of that. So kind of going off of why like branches are important. Like I said, it keeps the main branch stable, so you can ensure there's always going to be like a working version of the project. And then you can like experiment safely without breaking that existing code. Yeah, and another thing, you can work on multiple features at the same time, especially if you're working across a lot of different developers. If you're all working on a different feature, right? You're not going to try to like change that main one because something's bound to like break. Someone's probably going to overwrite something. So kind of like this diagram shows, you can have separate features going on at the same time. And notice how these features, like they're never like the blue's never gonna overlap with the yellow. It's never gonna conflict with it. And that's because like having separate branches just ensures that you get your own copy and you get to work with that however you want. Okay, yeah. So kind of going off what I was saying, how they let you collaborate with others, this would be just an example like flow of it. You have your main branch or master branch, right? This is like your official project. That's how I like to think of it. Let's say you want to create a feature. So you'll create a separate branch and you can see it diverges. That's why it's called like a branch, right? You can do whatever you want. And then let's say someone else also wants to like add another feature. They can do whatever they want. And then at the very end, let's say like once you know for sure your code works, then you could finally move it back into this main branch. And then same thing with the other developer. Like once they know their code works, they can move it back into the main branch. And notice how this entire time, like the blue and the orange were never on this main green line because like you don't want to experiment on the main official project. But it gives you a way to like add new features, fix bugs, do like different coding things without influencing that working branch. Okay. And then, yeah, this is just an example instead of collaboration, but it's showing like maybe one person's fixing a bug, one person's adding a new feature. But yeah, so there's a lot of different reasons why you would use branches, and it's pretty standard to use branches when you're working on a project. Okay, awesome. Here are some commands that you would use with a branch. So we have git branch. This will list all the different branches within your project. We have git branch name, and what this does is it creates a new branch. Git checkout, name of branch, it basically moves you to a branch. So by default, you start on the main branch, right? Let's say you create like a another branch. Let's just call it like feature one. If you want to start working in feature one, you're gonna say like git checkout feature one. Now you're like working in feature one. So that's how you actually like start working in a different branch. And then git merge branch is basically once you know for sure, like feature one, all the code is good, you want to merge it back into your main, right? Kind of like the diagram showed, it diverged, but then it like converged back into one main branch. So that's what git merge is for. It's like once you're done with your branch, you know everything on it works, you want to add that back into the main code and you're basically merging those changes and the branch together. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a bit more about GitHub. So GitHub is a platform where developers store and share their code. It's like one of the most popular platforms for this, I think. I believe it is the most popular. And it uses Git to track every single change made to a project. And you could kind of think of it as like a social network for developers where you can like follow other developers, you could start projects, and you could also contribute to other open source projects. So why do a lot of developers use GitHub in their project? It is like version control, so you can revert and compare changes across a lot, like across time. It's like, yeah, and it's used for collaboration. Like a lot of people use GitHub to work on a project together, and they're able to do it without overwriting each other, overwriting each other's code. And it's also very transparent, as you can see, like when every edit is documented, you could see like who made the commit, and you could trace back to it to see like, oh, when was this problem introduced, and you could use that to debug. And it also is very accessible, and your projects are available anywhere like online, so it's very easy to like just log into your account and you'll have your project right there. So I'm gonna go over some core concepts of GitHub. So as we said earlier, a repository is like kind of like a project's folder that you could store all your files and your history. You could clone a repository. It kind of you just downloads that to your computer and allows you to like work locally, and you could like kind of push and pull your changes to work on the project back in GitHub. And you could also commit, which is a snapshot of your code at any specific time. And it often has a short message describing what your change is. So GitHub allows you to work together with a lot of other developers on projects or anything. So you could push your code to GitHub, and that means you kind of upload your local commits to GitHub. You're uploading your changes to the online repository. And you could also pull your changes, which means like you're downloading the latest changes from the remote repository onto your local. And you could create a pull request, which a lot of people call like PRs. And that's a proposal to merge your local code into a branch and where team members can review it before it gets merged into the actual repository. And yeah, a merge is just like it combines like approved changes into the main branch of the remote repository. So in Git, there's Git fetch, Git merge, and Git pull, which can get a bit confusing at times. I know like when I first started, I was like, I don't know what these three things are. So fetching is just like you're downloading the changes from the remote onto your local computer, but you're not like modifying your working file. So it's just on there, but it's not changing what you have at the moment. And it is the safest option. It lets you like review your commits first, like it doesn't overwrite any code. Merging is what is like when you combine another branch like main into your current one, and it keeps both histories, but they might be like merge conflicts where you kind of have to like see like which code like which version that you want to keep, and so that gets a little like confusing. But git pull does fetch and merge automatically, so it updates your local branch and then it also merges the remote changes into it. Yeah. So with GitHub and like working with multiple people, I feel like merge conflicts are very bound to happen. They happen a lot when you're like you make your own branch and then you try to merge into main and someone else made like an edit to main and then you guys both have these edits on main and it's like gets really confusing. So one thing you could do is just like review your code carefully, like test your code. And a good practice is to always pull first before you push to main, just so you have all the edits of like your version is current when you push to main, so then you're not pushing any changes that have already been overwritten. And another good thing to do is write really clear commit messages. So like I fixed the login bug in login.js. So like if there is a bug and you're reviewing the history, you could see that um oh, this is what this person did. I should look into this and maybe this is where the bug was introduced. And another good practice is to push smaller pieces of code like more frequently. Like, oh, I make a change to this one component, I'll push this right now, as opposed to like, oh, I'm gonna change this other component without pushing my current code. Because then you're like, you have a lot of changes on your one commit, and that just like makes it more likely to have a merge conflict with anything else that anyone else is doing. Yeah, so this is some like very basic like steps and syntax of like kind of cloning a project and working on it in your own local repository. So you could first clone the repository using git clone and then the repository URL, which I'll show you guys how to do later in our demo. And then from there, you could kind of create and edit your files, like do whatever you want, make whatever changes you want. And then to stage your changes, you could do git add, and then whatever the files that you want to change whichever files that you want to add to the staging. So usually if you want to like stage all your files, then you just do git add dot, which means like all of the changes that you've made. And to commit your changes that are in like the staging area, you could do git commit /m. /m stands for like message. And then you could just write like any description of your change there. And then should also pull the updates to prevent any merge conflicts using git pull. And then once you do that, you could push to GitHub using git push origin main. That's usually, unless you want to push to your branch as well, which you could do git push and then the branch name. And then you could also pull from there, you could open a pull request on GitHub, which then other people can approve, and then you can merge into main. Yeah, so we're gonna go into a short demo about just like cloning a repository, making a branch, and trying to push that branch into main. So let's go right here. I'm going to, is this like too small? Can you guys see this or should I zoom in a little? Zoom in. How do I do that? I know. Okay. Okay, so right now I have Lavender's JavaScript demo repository pulled up in GitHub. So from here, if I want to clone this, there's like this big button over here, this big green button, and you could press this and it'll give you the URL of the repository. So you can just copy this here, and then you could go into your VS Code or whatever you're using, and in the terminal, you can actually just do, oh wait, let me make this bigger as well. Can you guys see that good? Okay. We could do git clone and then the repository that you just copied. So once you do that, oh, okay. Well, it's supposed to go into it's supposed to copy the repository into your computer. I already have it, so I'm just gonna go into that directory by doing CD, which means change directory, into JavaScript demo. Okay, so now I'm in the repository, but I need to initialize it to make sure I could edit it on my local. So I'm gonna do git init. Okay, so now I'm in the repository and I'm able to make changes to it. So let me actually open the file. Okay. So this is like what we have right now. It's just like some, oh, hold on. Yeah, it's just like some like this is like what Lavender did for her JavaScript demo. So it's kind of just like, oh, there's like an add button, whatever. So I'm not gonna really be adding anything. I'm just gonna be showing like how to make changes and how to add that to GitHub. So I'm just gonna add like a paragraph tab over here. I'll be like, hello, and then I'll save that. And then now we can see we could do git, hold up. What is it? Git status. Okay, do git status. And we can see that, oh, actually, okay, we can see that we have a change that is not staged yet for commit on, wait, index. Hold up. Okay. So we have a change that we don't that isn't stated like that isn't staged yet for commit. So to change that, so now okay, so now we want to stage we want to stage our changes. So to do that, we're going to do git add dot, like I said earlier. That just moves all of our changes to the staging area. So once we do that, we can do git status. Oh, yeah, and now we see we have like changes that are ready to be committed. So now once they're in the staging area, we could do git commit /m. And then this could just be like any message that you want that's like pretty descriptive of your change. So I'll just be like added hello. Okay. And once I do that, it's committed, but it's not yet pushed to the repository. So now I could do git push origin main. Okay. And now it should be in the repository. Let me check. Okay. Yeah, let me see this. Oh, is it on the branch? Oh, on the branch. I think I'm on the branch. Um, Okay, wait. I'm actually gonna do redo everything and I'm gonna make a new branch because I'm already on a branch right now. So first, wait. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna make a branch first. I'm gonna do to do that, I'm gonna do git checkout slash B. B means like new branch. And then I'll call it git demo. Okay, so now I created a new branch called git demo and I also switched to that branch. And you could see the branch in this corner right over here. And then now I'm going to, okay, now I'm gonna make another change. Let's be like, oh, git demo. And I'll save that change. And then now I could do git status to see the status of my file. And right here it says, okay, index.html has been modified, but I'm on branch git demo and these changes are not yet staged for commit. And it shows you what file it is. So right now we're in index.html and it says right over there. So now once like the changes are made and everything is like done, I want to stage my changes. So I'll do git add dot. And then now if we do git status again, we'll see we're still on git, we're on branch git demo and the changes are, yeah, the changes are now staged and they're ready to be committed. So now to commit, we'll do git commit, comma M, and then I'll be like added git demo text. Okay, and now it should have been added to my branch. So now we could look in GitHub or JavaScript demo. Where's my branch? Okay. Okay, yeah. I don't know why it's not working right now, but yeah. Okay. Okay. And then yeah, once we do that, you should be able to just do git push. Would it be to my branch or main?
Yeah. It'll give you the command you need to set the other things on.
Okay.
Yeah, so that get pushed.
Okay, okay. Yeah. So sorry, that's my bad. So once you like commit, you need to like push onto main. So I'll do that. Okay. And now we can look here. So once you do that on a branch, usually you get, if you go to the repository, you'll get this like thing right over here where you could just do compare and PR. And then it'll like show you this and you could kind of like write your description of like, oh, like what you did and try to get like approval like for people that are like, if this is like a big like project, then there probably will be like advisors or something that will like make sure that like it doesn't like crash the whole website or anything. So be like, added a paragraph with git demo. And then you could create a PR. And then, yeah, now you could usually like when there's like a lot of collaborators, there might be some people that need to approve first before um you do anything. But yeah, right now there's no conflict. So if I'll just merge the pull request, confirm merge, and now it should be in main. So if we check in main, we could see that I added git demo text and then I merged that into main. So yeah, that was just a quick overview of Git and how like just like the very basics on how to like get a clone and edit that and then push that to the remote repository that you're working on. Okay, we're gonna go back to the slideshow. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about Git or anything in general? Okay. Yeah, so you can just stay updated with this QR code right over here. Like those are all our social media or like anything. If you have any questions, you can always like text in the Discord.